Welcome to First Unitarian Society of Minneapolis, the birthplace of Congregational Humanism. We carry on that tradition of free thought today, dedicated to promoting a free search for truth, meaning, and justice. Our web address is firstunitarian.org. I'm David Breeden, Senior Minister. Welcome.
Hi, I'm Phil Duran, the Seasonal Celebrations team here at First Unitarian Society. If you've been a part of our congregation for really any period of time at all, you've probably already picked up that one of our most cherished traditions here is to celebrate our individual and community connections to the cycle of the seasons. This takes a lot of different forms, from our pageants welcoming the spring and fall equinoxes, the picnic for summer solstice, and of course our world-famous winter solstice celebration at FUS. This year, of course, everything is different, and a lot of those things aren't really happening. But one of the things that we are very committed to continuing is recognizing Lammas. Now, if you're not familiar with Lammas, let me tell you a little bit of the background. Between every solstice and equinox is a halfway point. And those are called cross-quarter days. There are 4 of those throughout the year. The ones that we kind of know of, but we may not think about in this context, are days like Groundhog's Day, May Day, and Halloween. But there's a 4th one, the one that often gets overlooked, and that's the midpoint between the summer solstice and the fall equinox, which we celebrate at FUS on the first Sunday of each August. And this is Lammas. Lammas is a word that comes from the phrase loaf mass. And the reason for that is that historically, this was the moment in the agricultural calendar when the very first grains began to become available that were ready to be harvested. And for agricultural communities, think about this, they had harvested their foods the previous year to get them through the winter and the spring while this new crop was growing. And so this was a moment of celebration, knowing that the crop was ready to be harvested, to be brought in, because that meant that they would have food again for the remainder of the year, into the winter, into the next year as well. And so Lammas was a time when people came together as families, as communities, to bring in the harvest, to convert those grains to flour in many cases, and to bake. And so this is where we get the concept of a loaf mass, like as in a loaf of bread. We've been celebrating this day at FUS for probably about 10 years or so now. And we've taken this theme in a number of different directions. We've been so fortunate to have people like Jean Christensen and her amazing team of bakers who will come in early on this day and go downstairs and bake loaves of bread, delicious bread. When we come into the building, we'll often sort of smell it beginning to bake and so on. And we have to sit through this whole service before we can go downstairs and get some bread for ourselves, a slice, an entire loaf perhaps. We've used bread as a metaphor for how we come together this time. And we've certainly gone in a number of different directions with the whole grain concept. Sure, there's flour, there's bread. We've talked about flour milling as a point in Minneapolis history, how it has played a role in the formation of our own city here. And we had a very informative, lengthy presentation by the Mill City Museum a couple of years ago, as you may recall. We've gone down the road of talking about honey, as you may remember, because we spread honey on bread, so therefore it seemed like it was fair game. There was the year that we talked about beer, because beer is grain based, and so we've taken a somewhat liberal approach to this. And so it is with Lammas of 2020. You've heard it. We're all kind of tired of hearing how this is an unusual year and so on and so forth. But with all that's going on in the streets here of Minneapolis, in our nation, around the world, the Seasonal Celebrations team looked at this at Lammas of 2020 and said, maybe this is an opportunity for us to stress baking. If you're intrigued, stay tuned.
morning, everyone. Monkey here. I've just been busy baking lots of good breads and rolls to help celebrate today. I hope you have some yummy baked things too. Now it's time to gather round for our Time for All Ages story, and it's a good one. It's about a couple of somewhat unusual bakers and unlikely friends. Are you ready? Dough Knights and Dragons by D. Leon. In a magical kingdom, far to the east, lived a very small knight and a very large beast. One day, while collecting fresh herbs in a glen, the young knight discovered a well-hidden den. It was filled with ingredients he'd not seen before. The lad couldn't resist. He just had to explore. In the blink of an eye, he filled a large vat with a little of this, a little of that. The pleasing aroma of hot savory stew woke a shape in the dark that soon came into view. The knight jumped in fright and feared he'd be caught, but the beast stopped to drink from the simmering pot. "This soup is delicious. Can't you stay, please? We'll cook and we'll dine, and we'll share recipes." There was something sincere in the dragon's appeal, so the knight ceased to think he'd become a hot meal. The unlikely pair learned they both liked to bake. They made sea serpent cookies and unicorn cake. They created tall castles with sugar and spice and stirred up huge helpings of pixie dust rice. But in that great kingdom so far to the east, friendship was outlawed between knight and beast. When a knight came of age, he was bound by a rule to spear a winged beast in a challenging duel. And a dragon was also required to fight, commanded by edict to swallow a knight. The upcoming match filled the friends with great fear, for both were required to take part that year. "I won't spear a dragon," the knight said. "I can't." "I won't eat a knight," said the dragon. "I shan't." They cooked and they baked, and they made a big mess. 5 plates of dessert didn't lessen their stress. On the eve of the contest, they had lots to do. They were bound and determined to make something new. So they mixed and they measured, they kneaded and rolled, then cut shapes from dough with a circular mold. They knew this creation could well be their last, and anxiously worked just a little too fast. They deep-fried the dough in a kettle of oil. The dragon's hot breath brought it all to a boil. The knight speared a shape that resembled a beast. Then he took a small bite and, oh, what a feast! The puffy dessert was both scrumptious and hot, but it also gave rise to an interesting thought. "I must pierce a dragon with my sword of steel, but the law doesn't state the beast must be real. And I am required to swallow a knight. If he's made of dough, shouldn't that be all right?" So they melted some armor, quite shiny and bright, for a cast of a dragon and one of a knight. They mixed sugar and flour, shortening and yeast. From the dough they created each knight and each beast. Exhausted, they pushed the scraps into a heap, washed their hands, brushed their teeth, and fell quickly asleep. Subjects came the next day from land, sea, and air to see how each knight and each dragon would fare. When asked who'd go first, the 2 friends volunteered. The spectators rose, waved their banners, and cheered. The worried contestants stepped onto the field. Then the knight dropped his sword and laid down his shield. "He'll be burned to a crisp," all the people exclaimed. "We'll win this first round," every dragon proclaimed. But the beast didn't aim at the small helpless knight. Instead, he set all of the cooking alight. The Dragon King fumed, and the Royal King thundered. "What's going on?" the shocked spectators wondered. When the dough knights were done, the beast swallowed a few, then proceeded to cook all the other shapes too. The knight pierced his sword through a dragon with wings. Then he and the beast humbly bowed to the kings. "I speared a winged beast, as the law states, my sire, and I ate a knight cooked with dragon breath fire. We don't understand why we always must fight. We made these together. Please, take a bite." So the dough knights and dragons were given a taste. The kings ate them all. Not a one went to waste. Because of the heroes, all dueling was banned, and all kinds of friendships soon spread through the land. Henceforth, competitions between dragons and knights consisted of bake-offs and festive food fights. The end. Well, I don't know about you, but that made me a little snackish. I guess I'll have to ask someone here at my house to do some baking with me today. I hope you have a chance to enjoy creating something good with those you care about. Take a moment and think about what you all might create together today.
Allison, thank you for that great story about dragons and baking. How perfect for today. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the online Sunday Assembly of First Unitarian Society of Minneapolis for August 2nd, 2020. I'm the Reverend Kelly Clement, one of the assistant ministers here at FUS. I'm joined online today by the Reverend Dr. David Breeden, senior minister, the Reverend Jim Fody, assistant minister, Allison Wyeth, director of religious education, FUS member Phil Duran, our house band, the Eclectics, and an amazing tech team who is making today possible for all of us and all of you. Thank you for making the effort to be present with us today from wherever you are. First Unitarian Society of Minneapolis is a member of the Unitarian Universalist Association of Congregations. We are an intentionally and radically inclusive congregational humanist community dedicated to promoting a brave, free, and responsible search for purpose, meaning, and justice. Our theme for the month of August is Season of Change, Summer 2020 at FUS. You know that our building is closed and that this congregation is one of the open mind, the open hand, and the open heart. If you want to know all the things about what is happening at FUS, all the things that are happening at FUS, read our Friday email each week and our monthly newsletter once a month, where you will find everything related to activities at FUS. If it's happening here, you'll find it there. If you're not already on our email list, you can sign up for it via our website, firstunitarian.org. It's down at the bottom of the homepage. You can sign up for the link there to get on our email address. And while you're on the website, poke around and find all the great information there, including contact info for our ministers and staff and ways to donate to our work in the world. If you like what you're seeing today, we invite you to like and subscribe to our FUS videos that we put out in the world. And another great way to stay connected is to join our Facebook group, Members and Friends at First Unitarian Society. That's the name of the group on Facebook, and we'd love to have you join the conversation there. After assembly today, Please join us for our popular coffee hour via Zoom. We will, as usual, use the breakout room feature. It lasts about half an hour, and of course you're welcome to come and go as you please. Even as some other parts of our larger community begin to open up, First Unitarian Society will maintain an online-only Sunday morning presence for many months to come. We're so glad you've joined us today. Thank you again for being here.
Each week when we gather, we light our chalice and share one of the 7 principles of Unitarian Universalism, or one of the aspirations of our congregation. This week we light the chalice remembering our aspiration to live joyfully and ethically in loving, reverent relationship with humanity and nature.
Now for our congregational covenant. Love is the spirit of this place, and service its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another.
When this old world starts getting me down, and people are just too much for me to face, I'll climb right up to the top of the stairs, and all my cares just drift right into space. On the roof, it's peaceful as can be. There the world below won't bother me. So when I get home feeling tired and beat, I go up where the air is fresh and sweet. Up on the roof, I'll get away from the hustling crowd and all that rat race noise down in the street. On the roof, it's the only place I know where you just have to wish to make it so. Up on the roof. At night, the stars put on a show for free. And darling, you can share it all with me. I keep on telling you that right smack dab in the middle of town, I found a paradise that's trouble-proof. Up on the roof. And if this old world starts a getting you down, there's room enough for two. Up on the roof. Up on the roof. Hey darling, up on the roof.
On Sundays when we gather, whether it's in person or online, we take a few minutes to reflect on the joys, sorrows, and milestones of the human experience. We do this so that we stay in touch with our own humanity. We do this to remind ourselves of the value of a moment of stillness. And we do this so that no one among us is alone, either in celebrating joy or in facing the burdens of life. This morning we have a joy from FUS members Mark and Marlene Sledehow. Their second great-grandchild, Dominic Leo Preston, was born on Wednesday to their granddaughter Rachel. Mom and baby are doing well, though it was a bit bittersweet for Dominic's dad, Chris, who was away on a National Guard deployment and was introduced to his son via video call. We congratulate Mark and Marlene and extend our good wishes to all, and we look forward to the day when it's easier for their family and all families to be together. We now take a moment of silence to reflect on all the challenges and heartbreak going on in our lives and in our world, as we grieve the lives lost to the pandemic and experience the grief that can come with extended isolation, and as we witness the continued threats to our democracy. And we think with gratitude of those who are working toward a better world by dedicating their lives to compassion, service, and justice. As we come out of the silence, we'll hear our traditional musical response. You're invited to sing along at home if you wish.
Good afternoon, my name is Anthony Cruz, and I am here to share just a few thoughts about my own reflection this past week on Coffee and Wisdom, one of our premier spaces for humanist and like-minded as well as hard-minded people to come together for 10 minutes or less to reflect about humanism, ethics, and our own lives. As many of you know, if you've been following faithfully, we've been engaging in many aspects of ethics. And today, I have decided to share with you some of my initial responses to a particular free thinker, George Eliot, who really captivated my thoughts as I was listening to her own understanding of ethics of care and the importance of interrelatedness and how human beings should aim to minimize the suffering of other human beings. As a chaplain, it is part of my job and responsibility to make sure that I am not only engaging patients from an intellectual framework, but also how am I connecting compassionately, ethically, and justly. This for me was just a reminder of the importance of how my own humanism is not only inviting me into a conversation for the responsible search for freedom and justice in the world, but at the same time, the highly urgent need for us to act more humanely in society. How am I moving beyond my individualistic practices and way of being into engaging the other person? How through my actions, through my thoughts and life stance, am I making sure that I am helping others become more free, more ethical, and more just in the world? I leave you with this thought. what has captivated your mind and what has captivated your heart. And how is that bringing transformation to your life and to your humanistic life stance?
This is the sound of one voice, one spirit, one voice, the sound of one who makes a choice. This is the sound of one voice. This is the sound of one voice. This is the sound of voices too. The sound of me singing with you, helping each other to make it through. This is the sound of voices too. This is the sound of voices too. This is the sound of voices three, singing together in harmony, surrendering to the mystery. This is the sound of voices three. This is the sound of voices three. This is the sound of all of us, singing with love and a will to trust. Leave the rest behind, it'll turn to dust. This is the sound of all of us. This is the sound of all of us. Ooh. This is the sound of one voice, one people, one voice, a song for every one of us. This is the sound of one voice. This is the sound of one voice.
Today's reading comes to us via CNBC, entitled Why Everyone is #quarantine baking their way through the coronavirus pandemic by Catherine Clifford. Social media has been awash in people sharing how their lives are changing due to the coronavirus. Efforts to flatten the curve have meant people are spending much more time cooped up at home, and many have turned to baking. It's soothing and meditative, says Maya Kosov, 27, a freelance reporter and editor living in New York City. I've been making recipes I'm very familiar and comfortable with, and I find it comforting to make and eat foods I've made and eaten 100 times before. It provides a sense of normalcy, which I think many people are craving right now. Indeed, that's a big reason people have been stress baking, according to Julie Ohana, a culinary art therapist. Culinary art therapy helps people communicate and manage stress through cooking. When times are turned on its head, we look for ways to cope, she says. So the heart of the explanation is that cooking and baking bring comfort. Baking a loaf of bread, some cookies, etc. is so basic, but fills such a void. Since right now so much in the world is unknown and out of our hands, when will I be able to go back to work, send my kids to school, travel for vacation. It is important we find other ways to have a say in our lives. For many, the act of baking is also calming because making cookies or baking bread is a form of mindfulness, says Ohana. While cooking is an art, baking is largely science. The exact mixes of ingredients being combined and reacting as they're supposed to is chemistry, says Valerie Van Galder, CEO of the Depressed Cake Shop Foundation, an organization that raises money for mental health issues with baking events. Another, perhaps surprising benefit to baking through the coronavirus pandemic, the sense of community it has created. I was going to bake my pumpkin chocolate chip cookies like I might usually do otherwise on a Sunday, but I decided to go live on Instagram, Kossoff says. It was a lot of fun, and the format really lent itself to conversation. Friends and family dropped in to ask questions or tell me what they were planning to bake. 115 of them to be exact, according to her Instagram numbers. Ohana went live on Facebook on Friday, March 20th, to make challah bread for Shabbat. She did it to share and connect with friends and loved ones, she says. It was fantastic! Van Galder is part of an online community of sourdough bread bakers as well as depressed bake shop bakers. I feel like I'm friends with the man who created the tool I use to slash my sourdough. His name is Tyler. I've never met him. I feel like I'm friends with Jim Hall, who developed the Challenger bread pan that I make my bread in, Van Galder says. I tag them like they're my friends in all my Instagram posts. But the psychological benefits of baking aside, baked goods are also generally a pleasure, says Van Galder. And during the grim coronavirus pandemic, that's a welcome respite. Baking, especially cookies and cakes, is a little bit of a treat and feels celebratory.
So if you're anything like me, you've probably had some extra time on your hands the past few months, and I've tried to put my time to somewhat good use. I've cleaned out a lot of different parts of this house, including here in the kitchen. And when I was doing so, I came across this cookbook. It's just the McCall's cookbook. There's nothing special about this book in particular, and obviously, I don't know if you can see this, but it has seen better days. But it's a special cookbook for me because it was a gift to me from my grandmother over 30 years ago. She gave it to me in Christmas 1989, and she inscribed it inside. And she said, "To the pumpkin cookie kid from the butterscotch bar lady." Now, I honestly don't really remember making pumpkin cookies, but apparently 30 years ago that was something that I did. But I definitely remember my grandmother making butterscotch squares. That was a recipe that just represented her. It was the quintessential her. And when I would go over to her house and she would have those out, it was just fantastic. And so it's always been a very special memory. Eventually, now the recipe is not actually in the cookbook itself. Eventually, she gave me the recipe on a 3x5 card in her own handwriting, of course. This too has seen better days, and I finally got around to putting it into a plastic sleeve to try to keep it safe. But I look at this and I see her handwriting and recognize it immediately, and just I feel so good with the memories that this produces for me. And so as we approached Lammas this year, I thought, well, why don't we try actually making some butterscotch squares? Because after all, they do include flour, hometown team. They do include flour, and that is, of course, the key to any Lammas celebration for you purists who are out there. So the first thing that we're doing is we have to melt butter. And it's a stick and a half of butter. So I've already gone ahead and done that. Now, my grandmother, when she wrote this recipe out, she made a point of making sure to underline for me that you're supposed to let the butter cool a bit. This was an expensive lesson on my part. learned when I tried to make her pecan pie. That also included butter and eggs and whatnot, and I did not let the butter cool, just cracked some eggs into it and off we went. And I didn't realize that in doing that, that basically started cooking the eggs. And the entire pie tasted just like an omelet. And there's nothing wrong with the taste of an omelet, but when you bite into it thinking you're getting pecan pie, that's kind of a wake-up call right there. And so we take the stick and a half of butter, and then we add to that 1.5 cups, make sure I have that right here, 2 cups, I almost got that wrong, that would have been all good, 2 cups of brown sugar. So you know that this is going to be basically healthy. Between the butter and the sugar, I guess I could have measured this out earlier, but I think that's about right. Put that right there. There we go. Now, it's not just that I have the handwritten card. When my grandmother died about 11 years ago or so, something like that, my father was the one who ended up cleaning out her house. And in going through her papers, he found something that he shared a copy of with me, which was this newspaper article. Now, my grandmother, back in about the 60s or so, she wrote a column for the Detroit Free Press. And this is a photocopy of one of her columns. It's not dated, but I believe it's from the 1960s. And it's got a kind of an awkward title in today's understanding of things. The headline is, "Don't be a slave to pots and pans." We wouldn't say that today. And then she goes on, also disturbingly, here's the lazy way to cook. Lazy. I don't think of my grandmother as lazy, but that's how she described it. But there's more that's in this story that's probably even a bit more surprising to me. So you just mix the butter and the brown sugar. Oh my God, this is looking good already. If I weren't on camera, I would just eat it right out of the bowl. But then people talk. Okay. So to this, we add 2 eggs. And we mix them up a little bit first before we add them in. Now, in case you're worried, I have been letting the butter cool a little bit already so that hopefully it's not going to start cooking the eggs while we speak. There we go. So, in her column, what my grandmother says is that, she celebrates this recipe, it's so easy, she's lazy apparently, but then she says, "I was delighted when a dear friend from Cleveland, Ohio, Ruth Abley, wife of the late Colonel Lester J. Abley, of course, gave me this lazy recipe for butterscotch square bars." And I thought, your dear friend Ruth Abley? How can it be that this recipe that I associate with her wasn't hers? Anyway, I mixed the butter and the eggs and the brown sugar all together into, oh my goodness, it looks like syrup practically. I don't know if you can even see that, but it looks really, really good. Now at this point, I add a little bit of vanilla. My grandmother, in her recipe, says it's a teaspoon. Sometimes she just calls it a glug. I don't know. But there, about a teaspoon. Maybe that's a little bit generous, but, it's vanilla. Can't go wrong. So here's the thing about that article. My grandmother refers to Ruth Abley as her dear friend. Well, bless your heart. But as it turns out, what my grandmother didn't actually mention in the article was that Ruth and Lester had been her in-laws, had been her parents-in-law. My grandmother had been married to the colonel's son, my grandfather. Sadly, the marriage didn't last, and by the time my grandmother wrote that article, apparently it was more convenient just to sort of, set him off to the side while giving a nice reference to his parents. Now, my grandfather and my great-grandfather both had this sort of unusual approach to family. Each of them got married, had a son, divorced, remarried, and had 2 more kids. That also was not in the article that my grandmother published in the paper. At this point, now we add some kind of boring ingredients. There's some salt, and I believe this is a half a teaspoon of salt. Are you getting all this? Half a teaspoon of salt. Don't do too much, because then everything starts tasting like salt. But a half a teaspoon of salt, and my grandmother says a scant teaspoon of baking powder. I actually am kind of a fan of baking powder, so I put in a little bit more. Not a ton, but it's not quite as scant as maybe she would have. There we go. So, I have this uncle. He's actually on my mother's side, but he's taken a fascination to my father's family. And he's just fantastic with all this genealogy and Ancestry.com and blah, 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 all of that stuff. He has been digging in to my father's family. And lo and behold, he turns up the daughters from my grandfather's second marriage. They're half-aunts. One of them lives in Boston, and one of them lives in Seattle. And he put us all in touch. And we've begun to speak and get to know each other, and that's fantastic. And my father met with his half-sister first. And they were just having a conversation and talking about family history, because that's, of course, the thing that puts us all together. And one thing leads to another, and he refers to this article in the reference to Abel's, and his sister says, "Oh my gosh, the butterscotch square, of course, everybody knows about that. We've been making those for years." Well, you could knock me over with a feather. Crazy. All right, so now that this looks like it's in pretty good shape, now for the main course for Lammas, because, got to do that, and that is flour. Now this is 1.5 cups of flour. I thought about wearing a white shirt just in case I ended up wearing all of this flour on it, but I'm taking a chance just to see if I can make it happen without a lot of chaos. So 1.5 cups of flour. Now I mentioned a moment ago that my great-grandfather and grandfather both had this thing going on where they marry once, have a kid, divorce, marry a second time, and have more. So it might not come as a great surprise to you that my uncle, the genealogy buff, he's been digging into my great-grandfather's family as well. And lo and behold, my uncle turns up some of the descendants from my great-grandfather's second marriage. Now there's quite a number of them, and I've only met one. She's a very nice person. I think of her as my cousin. She's really my father's cousin. And she lives outside of Boston. And we've gotten together as well. She was here in the Twin Cities about 2 years ago or so for a conference. And we were talking, and I said, well, why don't we get together and chat, get to know each other a little bit? And she says, that sounds wonderful. And I said, well, let me invite my father. So he comes in from Detroit. And perhaps you know where this is going. One thing leads to another, chat. Up comes the article, and my cousin says, the butterscotch square bars. Grandma Ruth's butterscotch bars. And again, my father and I are just floored. How is this possible that this amazing family recipe of ours, the thing that embodies my grandmother, is really not hers and is shared by all of these people? It put us on edge. That's all I can really say. All right. So now this is pretty well mixed up. It's pretty well mixed. How about that? All right. Now my grandmother, bless her heart, she knew what kind of a cook I was. And she said, make sure that you use a very well-greased pan. Now she wanted a bigger pan than this. This is a little bit small, but it's what I have. And I use pan because I'm cheap. So, we will give this a try and hope for the best. Now I hope the camera is picking this up. This looks like molten taffy. And it smells very good and looks fantastic. And we're trying to get all of it in the pan and not on the counter and not on me. I'm going to try and get most of it out of the bowl, but I might not be able to get absolutely all of it out of the bowl and off the spatula. And once the camera's off, I don't know how I'm going to clean that. But hopefully I'll come up with something. And so, there you go. Now, this goes in the oven at 325. Now, my recipe says for 30 minutes. My experience is you need to bump it up closer to 40, but I check it pretty regularly once you get to that half-hour mark. So I just put it into the oven at 325 and sit back and wait for the aroma. I've made this recipe now many times in my life. I have to look every single time to figure out what the proportions are. But every time I do it, it just reminds me of my grandmother. Like I say, she's been gone now for a number of years. But when I make what I've always thought of as her butterscotch squares, I can see her, I can hear her. She had a way of talking with her hands. I can see that as plain as day. I can see her kitchen, the things that were on the wall, things that were on the counters. I can see the whole house. I haven't been in it in a decade, but it's like I'm there right now. And this recipe, maybe it's not hers. Maybe she got it from her dear friend, former mother-in-law Ruth, which is fantastic. But now, when I make this same recipe, now I think about her. I think about a great-grandmother whom I never met. And obviously now there are all these other people too. These aunts on opposite ends of the continent, a cousin in New England. All of these people I'm connected to. They say that blood is thicker than water, and I got to tell you, if you were watching, butterscotch is thicker even still. And somehow this recipe, a bit of flour, a bit of butter, a whole lot of brown sugar, becomes a vehicle for thinking about the connections I have to people who are distant from me geographically, people who have gone before me, people, like I say, I never met. And it seems to me that sharing food, sharing meals, sharing recipes is a way that we promote and sustain connections, and we promote and sustain a community of people, a family, a congregation, an entire ethnic group. Here at FUS, we've celebrated Lammas in August for something like 10 years now. And for those of you who've been, you know that kind of the tradition is we have an assembly as you would expect, and then we go downstairs and we have that fresh-baked bread that Jean and her team put together. And it's not just about Lammas. It is, of course. But it's also about the connections. How we all come together for a tradition, for a meal, a recipe that we have passed down through the congregation. It's just what we do. It's part of who we are. And Lammas is an opportunity not just to celebrate our ties to the cycle of the seasons, but our ties to one another, including even today when it's harder than usual. Hold on. Now, you may be wondering, how do I get my hands on an oven that bakes things so quickly, cools them to the touch so quickly, takes them out of the pan, cuts them up, and puts them on a platter? You know, it's an amazing thing. And it really just boils down to, you gotta know the right people. This looks and smells fantastic. And as I think about digging into this, mostly once the camera's off, I'm curious to know, what recipes do you have in your family that have been passed down through the generations that remind you of somebody you know or knew, loved? What are the recipes that you yourself are creating that you might pass along? We're in a very unusual time right now. Perhaps this is an opportunity to create a dish of your own, pass it along, so that 100 years from now they'll say, oh, that's what our great-grandparents ate during the pandemic of 20. Whatever it is, maybe this is an opportunity to get that recipe out and try making it. If you haven't in a long time, try producing that again. And then, as you do, take a bite. Oh my God. I'd forgotten. My goodness. But take a bite, savor the taste of what you've made, and savor the relationships and the connections that you have, either literally or figuratively, to the people with whom you're sharing it. Family, friends, community. However you do it, enjoy. Have a great Lammas.
If you will repeat with me, please, our extinguishing chalice words. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. All of these we carry in our hearts and in our minds until we are together again.
These are the days of the endless summer. These are the days, the time is now. There is no past, there's only future. There's only here, there's only now. Oh, your smiling face and your gracious presence, the fires of spring are kindling bright. Oh, the radiant heart and the song of glory, crying freedom in the night. These are the days of enchanted pleasure, verdant gardens, bathed in light. This is the love of earth's splendor, summer's beauty, sweetest life. These are the days of the endless dancing, and the long walks on a summer night. These are the days of the true romancing, when I'm holding you oh so tight. These are the days of enchanted pleasure, verdant gardens bathed in light. This is the love of earth's fair splendor, summer's beauty, sweetest light. These are the days that we now must savor, and we must enjoy as we can. These are the days that will last forever. You've got to hold them in your heart. Na 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 na, na 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 na, na 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 na, na 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 na, na 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 na, na 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 na, na 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 na. These are the days.
Thanks for joining us during this season of change, the summer of 2020. And special thanks to our seasonal celebrations team today for making Lammas and this assembly today so special. We want to thank you so much for supporting First Unitarian Society of Minneapolis and helping to keep the voice of Unitarian Universalist Humanism alive and strong in these troubled times. We need your help. We can use you as a volunteer. We have so many volunteer activities that you can join in on. Just email me, minister@firstunitarian.org. Also, we need your help financially. You can give on PayPal or at our website, firstunitarian.org, or on the Give Plus app. We are here for you. Always remember that. We are here for you. Until we meet again, be fearless, ask questions, hold on to what is good, strengthen the weak, comfort the fearful, serve the suffering, do what makes you come alive, because we need lots of people to come alive in these times. Rejoice in the power of the human spirit. So may it be. Thanks for listening. You can find much more about humanism and what's happening at First Unitarian Society in Minneapolis by visiting our website at firstunitarian.org.